What's going on, everybody? It's Ricky from VideoHomicide, and today I've dusted off the old Rcrum comic book and art book collection because it's been way too long since I talked about comic books or art on the channel. At one point, if you've been watching my stuff for a while, I used to pretty much only talk about comic books, but then I sort of fell out of love with them, sort of re-fell in love with cinema, and it's been like that for a while. But as of lately, for the last, I would say since the pandemic first started back last March, really fell back in love with art and creating and drawing and doing all kinds of different artistic endeavors. So I want to share with you guys one of my biggest influences, and that is Rcrum. And if you're unaware of who Rcrum is, I would highly suggest checking out, there's a couple of good documentaries. One of them is called Crum, which just is amazing, totally good. You can find that probably on Amazon or on eBay, somewhere like that. It might even be on YouTube, but highly doubtful. Another great one is Confessions of Rcrum, which I believe is on YouTube. That's a really good insight, probably in the mid to late 80s, I would say. Another really good documentary that he is featured in is called Comic Book Confidential, which I think is one of the best documentaries of all time. I really love it. Or William Games, that did Mad Magazine, Tales from the Crypt, all those kind of dudes, as well as your underground artists like Rcrum, Spain. Spain doesn't get an interview in there or a segment, but he's featured throughout. Jack Kirby is in there. Some other very well-known artists of the time. Comic Book Confidential, that is one you really got to check out. There's also a really good little bit in there that takes place with the dude from American Splendor, Harvey Pekar, that's what it was, Harvey Pekar. So Harvey Pekar and Rcrum eventually teamed up, but nonetheless, we're going to get into it. Rcrum, there's been movies based on his works, most notably, I think really the only one based on his works was Fritz the Cat, which had a sequel called The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat, which apparently he wasn't that shit hot about. He wasn't really a big fan of it because they kind of botched his character and his ideology and all that kind of stuff. But anyways, I would check it out regardless, just because it's a great piece of animation. I believe Ralph Bakshi was behind it, who of course was behind a lot of good, what you might call adult animation of the time. If you're unaware with what underground comics might be, I can give you a little bit of a history right now. So in the 1960s, all they really had for comic books were superheroes and funny animals and love stories, and there was EC Comics with the horror comics and stuff like that, but they were put to an end quickly by, I believe, Frederick Wortham was the guy's name, who basically said comic books are destroyers of children's minds. If they see a horror comic by EC Comics where a kid kills his mom, then a kid's going to read that and kill his mom. If you see Superman fly off of a bridge, the kid's going to jump off the bridge thinking he can fly, that type of deal. So when that happened way back when, it kind of spawned this revolution of these underground comic book creators that came along, like Rcrum, Spain, S. Clay Wilson, Gilbert Sheldon, all these kind of guys that just decided, fuck it, we're going to break all the taboos, we're going to do whatever we want in these comic books, we'll fund them ourselves, we'll make them for cheap, sell them for cheap, and we'll get them out there. And especially with the whole 1960s counterculture with, the Vietnam War and the opposition of the war, all that kind of stuff. There was a lot of drug use at the time, a lot of sex. So these comics kind of played on that, the LSD trips, the sexual, indulgence, all that kind of stuff. So you got a lot of comic books talking about stuff that you wouldn't hear in your Archie comics, i.e. the sex, the drugs, the rock and roll, all that kind of shit. Rcrum, maybe not so much the rock and roll. He's more of a kind of a folk, 1930s folk kind of fan. And he actually ended up having his own band called the Cheap Suit Serenaders, which we'll get into later. All right, so we'll start off the Rcrum comic book collection with a couple of issues of Zap Comics, which was first made popular, I believe, in the very mid to late 60s, I want to say. I don't have any of the early issues, but I do have issue 11, Zap Comics number 12, which is a very sort of cyberpunky type feeling here on the cover. Later on in his life, when he remarried, he married a lady named Aileen, and they put out comic books together where they would collaborate on the character design. So you could see his wife did her and Robert did him You know what I mean? They drew each other, but themselves, if that makes sense. So there's a slew of these types of comics where you get all kinds of messed up stuff, everything from like everyday living to like, you know, deep dark fantasies. So it's pretty crazy stuff. Here's a cool comic book that features some very classic stuff. I believe this is about the 5th printing. This is the People's Comics, and it's got a lot of really explicit stuff in here. Really cool cover, very Robert Crum. Lots of good cross hatching. He's very, very good at including a lot of detail in the cartooniness of it all, if that makes sense. Next, we got 2 of my sort of prized possessions. This is an actual first print of Hup, issue 1. And we've also got a copy of issue number 2. And if you just take a look at the artwork, you just see like the amount of detail he put into these books, man. It's unreal. Like when you look into some of his like earlier stuff, it's very kind of archaic, but at the same time very Crum. Whereas these are just totally full of detail. Like there's almost no white on the page, if you catch my drift. So very interesting stuff right there. Moving on, we got issue 3 of Mr. Natural. Mr. Natural is one of his sort of staple characters who we'll get into a little bit later. You know, I believe he kind of coined the name Mr. Natural by listening to the radio once, and this guy came on, and you know, after a song played, this guy was on the radio saying, like the DJ comes on and he says, and that was Mr. Natural, you know, and just kind of ran with that. Moving on, we got Mystic Funnies, issue number 1. Which features Mr. Natural, and I forget the name of that other character that he's got on the cover there, but he's been through a lot of Crum's work. And then, of course, we got Mystic Funnies number 2, which is done much like in the style of your EC Tales from the Crypt type comic cover with the 3 little balloons with the different characters on there, like Fairy Godmother, her boots, the moron. It's just crazy stuff. Like you kind of have to be in a certain mode or mood to look at this art, or to read the art rather. Looking at it is a fantastic experience, but reading the stuff, you just get this sense that he's such a twisted dude. It's crazy, man. This, I believe, was the first issue of the Robert Crumb comics I ever bought. This is Xyz Comics, I believe, issue 1. And you got a character there with a very twisted looking chick. Robert Crumb is known for like his love of like bigger chicks, like big thighs, big ass, and just kind of gaping. Like this is a kind of, you know, not a pretty looking Robert Crumb woman design. He can make them look pretty good. So moving along, we got some hardcover books. We got some art books here. First up, we got The Weirdo Years from 1981 to 1993, which I don't know if that was the start of it. I think there might be another volume of this book, like an earlier volume. You get the sense of the type of shit Robert Crumb's into in here. All sorts of different styles. Oh, look, there's a bookmark in there. So I was clearly reading this at one point. It's been a long time since I really read any Crum. Getting to a sense of his really fine line work and just really excellent use of cross hatching. A lot of people can definitely relate to the type of, you know, a lot of people can really draw inspiration from his artwork, even if you're not into like the cartoony look, but just his use of, you know, inking, cross hatching, all that stuff. It's fantastic. So this is a really cool one. This is the complete record cover collection by Rcrum. And it's got a really nice sleeve, sort of, you know, done up like the style of a vinyl record. And you take a look in it, and it's just beautiful. Everything from his Janis Joplin cover to covers he did for like different blues bands and, you know, bands that he loved. His own band, Cheap Suit Serenaders. Very, very nice stuff. You can tell he was really into 1930s, 1940s type music, and it's great stuff. Good for a music fan or for an art fan, really. I think I picked that up for a steal. I think I probably got that at Heroes Comics here in London, which is a great spot to pick up art books and comic books. So moving along, there's like an entire series going all the way up to like volume 15, because I've got volume 15 right here, but we got the complete Crum comics. Okay, so I mentioned earlier Mr. Natural. This is a beautiful hardcover book put out by Fantagraphics. The Book of Mr. Natural. And it is beautiful, man. It is so nice, so pristine. I think I paid, what, 25 bucks for this, Canadian. And you got, like, the history of Mr. Natural. And it's awesome, man. Like, there's some really good stuff. Like, his one of his most famous strips with Mr. Natural is the 719th Meditation, where he just meditates, like, through the history of mankind. It's so cool. Really good stuff. I would recommend picking one, like either this one or the next book up for your starter into Crum. Although I know it's only one character, but you're going to get appearances from other of his characters. But anyways, moving on, we've got The Life and Death of Fritz the Cat, also put out by Fantagraphics, and another amazing book. And it's got the entire history of Fritz the Cat, everything from his inception, from the early days, all the way to his death, where he was stabbed in the head with an ice pick by, I believe, an ostrich chick. Yeah, that's right. I first discovered Rcrum through Fritz the Cat, the movie, and I fell in love with it. And my dad had, a vague, little bit of knowledge about Rcrum, and there was a bookstore called Kohl's near me. And I remember we went there, and my dad bought this book for me because he was big on buying me books, and I still have a lot of books that he bought me, but this is the Rcrum handbook, and it's thick. I think it's got to be at least 500 pages. Let's see. Yeah, so it's about 450 pages, and it's got everything you need to know about Rcrum as a sort of a newbie. And this one even came with a really cool bookmark and the CD, the music sampler of the Cheap Suit Serenaders, and has a really cool timeline in the back. But I learned everything I know about Rcrum through this book. I read it probably about 4 times before I left public school, and I thought I was like the only one that knew about Rcrum back then. I thought I was like totally in the know, you know what I mean? And I thought he was so cool and vile. And even like this toilet that you see somewhere in the book, I used to draw it all the time. I thought it was so badass. You get a lot of his classic work in here. You get a lot of his classic stories. Everything from him leaving his wife in Cleveland to just one night sporadically just leave and go to San Francisco until he was guilt-ridden and called her and said, come move out to San Francisco because that's where I'm at. And she did, and then they ultimately ended up breaking up. But that's my Rcrum collection. All right, there's some really good videos on YouTube. I'll leave links to them in the description because I feel like he needs to be brought back into the public attention because there's so many good artists on YouTube, Instagram, that I believe would benefit from looking at his work, because I feel like we're so lucky to be in this age of technology where like we can look at people's art from Germany, we can look at people's art from Japan or from Canada or from the States or from Mexico, Jamaica, like any country in the world, like we can just easily, boom, Jamaican artwork, Canadian artwork, or Canadian artists or whatever, an artist from the UK. We can find all their work. And it's guys like this that if they wanted to see other people's work, they had to go out and buy comic books, buy expensive art books, or never see it at all. Go to a museum maybe, but we are very lucky to live in this age. So I highly recommend checking out the videos to the links in the description. You'll find some good stuff there. So with that being said, I appreciate everybody for watching this video. Stay tuned for more. Definitely stay tuned for another sort of artist spotlight, if you want to call it that. And I'll check you guys in the next video. Adios.